Hello everybody. Today I'm going to do another Chits and Cats Soundbites, and since I'm going to discuss the Lord of the Rings, the card game, the Black Rider Saga expansion, and I'm going to discuss every single adventure pack within that Saga expansion, and today's first one is called A Shadow of the Past. I decided to choose this particular tune called Thatched Villages because we are going to talk about hobbits in their natural habitat, fleeing the Shire. Unlike the normal Lord of the Rings LCG, which does not really cover any or many events, or any events actually, in the Lord of the Rings book, but only draws on the universe and actually is set between the Bilbo leaving the Shire on his 111th birthday, and then Frodo Baggins leaving the Shire 17 years later on his would be 50th birthday, or around his 50th birthday. The Saga expansions for the Lord of the Rings LCG actually try to translate the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'm going to use the word trilogy, although of course I know that Tolkien never intended the books to be a trilogy. He wanted to have just one book, the trilogy, into the living card game. And so the first box in this 6-box expansion set, or Saga expansion set, is called the Black Riders, and it contains 3 adventures: A Shadow of the Past, A Knife in the Dark, and Flight to the Ford. The Shadow of the Past is also the name of one of the chapters in The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. And the story goes that after Bilbo Baggins leaves the Shire, and that's how the Lord of the Rings actually starts, with a long-expected party, Gandalf sets out to find out what's happening in the realm of man, because things are going strangely. He knows that Bilbo has the ring, and he realizes that the ring has been doing something to Bilbo. It has prolonged his life. And he also realizes it makes him invisible, which indicates that the ring is powerful. It's not a trinket you carry, as Aragorn says in the film later. And he basically tries to find out more about the ring, and he persuades Bilbo to leave the ring to Frodo. Now, Bilbo has a bit of trouble giving the ring up, but finally manages to actually just leave it to his nephew. And Gandalf then also tries to find out more about this ring, and he comes back every so often to the Shire and meets with Frodo and keeps an eye out on things. But he comes back one day and he puts the ring to the test, and this is a very important part of the whole story. He takes the ring and puts it into the fire. And then he takes it out again, puts it into Frodo's hand, says, "You can touch it, it's fine, it's quite cool." And he asks him, can he see any markings? And Frodo says, no, there aren't any. But then after a couple of seconds, he says, oh no, wait, there are markings. It's actually some form of Elvish, which I can't read. And he says, Gandalf says, well, there's only very few who can. And it's written in the dark language of Mordor, which I won't utter here, but what it essentially says is, one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows are. So part of this is inscribed in the ring, and it identifies this ring as indeed the one ring that Sauron, the deceiver, forged to essentially bring all of the other rings under his control. Now, Sauron was quite successful in subjugating the 9 rings, and he also was able to get some or all of the dwarven rings under his control, but he never could get the 3 great elven rings. And so it is now established that the ring that Frodo has is the one ring, and Sauron is looking for it and will definitely find it. Something has to be done. So Frodo and Gandalf reach the conclusion that Frodo should leave the Shire And he doesn't know where to go, but Gandalf suggests, oh, go to Rivendell. Imladris is where Elrond, half-elven, resides. He's one of the most powerful people on Earth, in Middle-earth, and, you know, talk to him and he may know what to do. And so they say, okay, they kind of come up with a date. He says, you know, don't wait too long. You know, wait until, you know, make preparations, because don't just leave. That's going to make people suspicious. So they come up with this plan that Frodo, who is from Buckland originally, not from Hobbiton, and he's not like Bilbo Baggins, a local, but he's actually moved in from the east to live with his uncle. Should decide to sell up Bag End, sell it to the Sackville Bagginses, and then essentially move east to Crick Hollow, into Buckland, where he was originally from. So he buys a little hobbit hole there, and he decides to move there, or it's actually, I think he actually buys a house there. So to kind of start planning so that it doesn't look rushed. And then say, okay, well, and then what you do is you move there, you pretend to move there, you make a show of moving there, and then you go on to Bree, and then, you know, on to Rivendell. And Gandalf also says, you know, and I'm going to be with you. I'm gonna accompany you on your road, because it's going to be, you know, he doesn't say it's going to be dangerous, but he says, you know, you may be needing my help after all. And so the two part ways. Gandalf has to leave. He says he has to check some things out, you know, but, you know, I'll be back in good time so that we can make the journey together. However, time passes, autumn comes in, and no Gandalf. And Frodo is beginning to feel uneasy. His birthday is in September, so, you know, it's cutting it close. And then Gandalf doesn't show up, and then he decides to go through with the plan. He sells his Hel's house, and he then has a last supper there. He has a last meal with his friends, and then they load the remaining stuff onto little wagons. They take them to Crick Hollow, and he decides to go for a walk and walk the Shire, to wander the Shire one last time, and march march on Crick Hollow, as it were, with his friends, because it is actually quite a long way. And that's essentially part of the story that is told in A Knife in the Dark. Well, it is actually the story that is told in A Knife in the Dark expansion. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a picture of the Shire. You'll probably have seen it if you've read the books, because this is out of the Lord of the Rings itself, and it's a part of the Shire. You have Hobbiton in the northeast. The blue line is more or less the way that that they march along the road, and then they cut across the green fields. They go to the Green Hill country. They go through the forested woody end. They spend 2 nights outside. On the first night, they encounter a fox, or rather a fox encounters them while they're sleeping, and he's wondering, you know, oh, that's really weird. There's you know, hobbits sleeping outside. That's strange in and of itself, because hobbits really like to you know, they really like good beds, and they like comfortable hobbit holes, and they're not really known for, you know, spending nights outside. You know, that's not their normal situation. So he's quite surprised, and he's wondering why they are outside and what they're doing there. But as Tolkien says, he never found out the reason for this. And then they also have a chance meeting with a black rider. So as they wander across the Shire, they come across black riders. One of them comes quite close. Some of them they only see in the distance. They can also hear them cry. The cry of the black riders is actually quite terrifying. And Frodo realizes they are evil. There is something really weird going on. And he's also quite shocked by the fact that evil has managed to already creep into the Shire. So he doesn't want to be seen, so he decides, stay off the road. He doesn't follow the stock road, which would be the easiest way, but he decides to go into the forest to hide from view. And there he also has a chance meeting with a couple of elves led by Gildor in Glorion, who's a very, very old elf, ancient elf, very wise. He's a high elf. And the two of them have a conversation because he says to Gildor, well, I'm kind of afraid. And Gildor invites them to spend the night in the elven sleeping quarters, which are of course under the sun, or under the stars rather, in the woods. And they have a conversation, and Gildor says, well, I will not tell you anything about them, because if I tell you what they are and who they are, it might deter you from what you've set out to do. And since I don't know what you've set out to do, I cannot really tell you if it's a good idea or not. So I don't want you to leave the path that you have set upon by deterring you. But he also makes a prediction that by the end of all of this, Frodo will know much more about these Black Riders than Gildor. And then they part ways, and then they keep walking. They come to the Marish, which is essentially open marshland. They get into the farmer Maggot's fields, and they essentially meet up with Farmer Maggot. It's a very important meeting, which over the writing of The Lord of the Rings changes considerably. In its earliest forms, the farmer is actually quite a mean person, and he seems to be pushing his own agenda. He may or may not even be in league with the spies of Bill Ferny's in Bree. But later on, the whole situation is changed completely by Tolkien, and the farmer becomes a very important ally to Frodo. He's actually described as somebody who faced down one of the Black Riders who came by to ask about Frodo Baggins. And he just basically shoos him off his land and says, leave, this is my land, you have nothing to do here. And he treats the hobbits to a really, really, even by hobbit standards, I guess, a really big feast dinner, and also provides them with a hamper full of mushrooms, because all hobbits love food in general, but especially mushrooms, apparently. And then he puts them into his horse and cart and drives them close to Buckleberry Ferry, where they encounter Merry, I believe, and who set out to look for them because he thinks that they may have gotten lost on the road. And then they make it to Buckleberry Ferry, and they cross the Brandywine, and they feel quite safe, at least for a while, because the horses cannot cross the Brandywine because it's too wide, so the Black Riders can't just swim it. And if they want to get into Buckland, they would have to go through the gate, which is 20 miles up north at Brandywine Bridge. But it's kind of guarded, because Buckland itself is outside of the Shire, because it's across the Brandywine, and so it's almost like a Hobbit island. On the one side, it is bordered by the Brandywine itself, and on the other, it's bordered by the Old Forest, and they have built the hedge, or planted the hedge, to keep the Old Forest away from Buckland, because the Old Forest is actually quite menacing, and it moves, and the trees move, and one day they even tried to invade Buckland. And of course, then on the northern end, you have the East Road, which leads from the Grey Havens essentially to Bree and further east. And in order to ensure that they are safe, they've actually built gates, and you cannot just get into Buckland at night, especially not if you're a Black Rider. And you look kind of menacing, and you instill fear in people. So they kind of feel safe for the night. And this is essentially the first leg of their journey. Now, how is this translated into the game? As you can imagine, there are two salient points in LCG terms. Number one, you would expect to see plenty of locations, because essentially the hobbits are traveling. And this is true. You have plenty of locations. But of course, it's not just simply, oh, let's go questing like maybe the Hills of Emyn Muil, or even parts of the journey down the Anduin, when you're basically traveling down the Anduin and you just take, you know, additional cards and you get location after location after location, because you're covering so much country and so much ground. But of course, you also have enemies, and of course, the enemy is the Black Riders. You also have a couple of, or two important, I would say, events. Namely, Gandalf doesn't show up, so the hobbits do not have the help that they would require. But you also have the chance meeting with Gildor. So first of all, of course, you have the Black Riders themselves. And the Black Riders themselves come in the form of enemy cards. And first of all, the artwork is really beautiful. The enemy itself is quite difficult for a hobbit to kill and quite strong with 5 attack. But, you know, if you have Elrond and he's got defense 3. If you've got his daughter Arwen out, he's got defense 4, or you can give him defense 4. If you then also have a burning brand, he might take 1 wound per attack. And then if you have a Warden of Healing in your deck, the Black Riders are essentially not really a problem. Also, even with my deck, starting threat 27, it's going to be 8 rounds or 8 increases of threat before these guys even attack. Unless you lose a hide check. And this is a particular mechanic that they introduced for this adventure pack, because the Black Riders are essentially looking for you, and they are following the ring. The ring draws them. They sniff out the ring. So when you come across them, what you have to do is you have to hide. And how do you hide? Well, very simply, you hide by exhausting a character or characters. You take their willpower, and then you reveal a certain amount of cards from the encounter deck. For a Black Rider, it says hide 2, so you reveal 2 cards, and then you add their threat levels together. And if the threat level, the combined threat level of the cards that you've drawn from the encounter deck is more than your combined willpower committed to the hide check, you lose. And then, of course, the Nazgul would actually attack you straight away, regardless, the Black Riders, regardless of your threat engagement costs. But it can also be a good thing, because if you've got the Daggers of Westerness, which come with this set, you get a bonus for fighting someone whose threat level is higher than your, whose engagement cost is higher than your threat. So that's how they try to bring in the menacing role that they play. But of course, seeing as your threat may be quite low, they are kind of aloof. You know, they're not necessarily engaging you unless they detect you. And of course, being detected is what you're trying to avoid. So the other thing that, of course, is very important in the book is the fact that Gandalf isn't there, and they have tried to get Gandalf's absence into the game by bringing in a card which is called Gandalf's Delay. And Gandalf's Delay is an objective, and it's a burden. In campaign play, you get burdens and you get boons which stay with you throughout the campaign. In this particular game, you only have 2 burdens in the first adventure pack. Gandalf's Delay and the Ring draws them, and at the end of the adventure you have to choose one of them to keep. Now, Gandalf's Delay reads as follows. At setup, add Gandalf's Delay to the staging area. Each player draws 1 less card as in his starting hand. And that can be very crippling. In the beginning, when I finished the first episode, I decided to keep Gandalf's Delay and get rid of the Ring draws them. And I soon realized that with my deck, I really cannot afford to have 1 less card in my hand. I don't have enough card draw, although I do have 3 Ancient Mathams, I have usually 1 Imladris Stargazer, and I've got 1 Master of the Forge. Still, it wasn't enough. I still didn't feel comfortable playing this way, so I decided to actually go back, replay the first one, get Gandalf's Delay out of my burden deck, and put in the Ring Draws Them instead. The Ring Draws Them has yet to really cause me problems. It's been fine so far because I've always been able to cancel it using a Test of Will. So essentially, they try to kind of emulate this idea of, oh, there's an important ingredient missing, there is support missing, there is advice missing, by ensuring that you have 1 less card to start with. However, in a way, they are mitigating this straight away, because another thing that happens at the very beginning is you set out from Bag End, which is essentially Bilbo's home, and also the home of Frodo Baggins. And this card reads, after Bag End leaves play, each player draws 1 card for each Hobbit hero he controls. Now, with this particular Saga expansion, you get at least 4 Hobbit heroes, maybe even 5. I'm not sure, I didn't count them. So you always have Frodo as the ring bearer, and then plus 3 heroes. So Frodo always adds, he doesn't count towards your hero limit. So if you have a full Hobbit gang, you draw 4 cards once you've explored Bag End, which could happen even on your second turn. So you have card draw built in. So it's kind of, I guess this is almost like saying, okay, now we're moving, we're packing our bags, we're getting resources, we're getting our stuff, and we're out of here. So they're trying to counteract it a little bit. So I didn't feel the problem with Gandalf's Delay so badly in the first scenario. Although I didn't have a full Hobbit troop traipsing through the Shire, I only had 1 hero, namely Frodo, but I still got this extra card. So, but in future games, I realized it was just crippling. So as we set out from Bag End, we make our way to the Green Hill country, and we try to also kind of enjoy the fact that it's late summer or even autumn. It's beautiful weather. In the book, it's really lovely described. It's actually one of my most favorite parts of The Lord of the Rings, is the part where they essentially travel around the Shire. It reminds me of my first holidays in Britain, which of course a lot of the Shire is based on, and a lot of Middle Earth is based on, but especially the Shire. So the fact that you're walking through hilly country actually also, in spite of instead of just having, you know, like flavor to it and just representing an actual location, it also gives you a benefit because it's hilly, so you can't see that far. So while you are in Green Hill country, so while it's the active location, you get +1 will to characters that are committed to hide tests. So that's really good because obviously it's easier to hide. You also have the area of the Woody End, which is another very important location because that's where they meet Gildor Inglorion. Now, Gildor and meeting him isn't really part of a location, but I'm coming to how they brought him in. So Woody End, while it is the active location, reduces each hide X value by 1. So if you have a hide 2 check, for example, again, it's the Woody End, there is forest, it's very easy to slip away, especially if you're a hobbit. If you have a hide 2 check, you suddenly only draw 1 card. If it's a hide 1 check, you draw no card. So it really helps you to keep away and out of sight. On the other hand, you have the stock road, which of course, since it's a road and quite a wide and big one and long one as well, means, you know, you are much more visible. And they have also translated this into a game mechanic on the card. While the stock road is in the staging area, it's not even the active location. While it's in the staging area, you add 2 to the total threat of the discarded cards when a player resolves a hide test. And even just in order to travel to it, because you really want to get this one out of the staging area. I mean, if you've got a northern tracker, you can just put exploration tokens on it while it's in the staging area. So if you have a northern tracker and Asphalov, you can get rid of it in 1 turn. But still, it's going to be crippling you if you draw a Black Rider while this is in the staging area. And even if you want to travel to it, you have to make a hide 1 check. And as you're traveling to it, it will actually give you the +2 as well. Which also is very important to note, because one could say, okay, well, it's very simple. I just bring in loads of allies and then I can just pass any will test, any hide check whatsoever. It's not a problem. I can even use 0 will point allies together with Faramir and then just increase their willpower by 1. But it's not so easy, because all the while you're doing those hide checks in the Shire, in the 2A to B stage of the adventure, you add the total number of allies to the total hide check threat value. So if you have 5 allies with willpower 1, it looks like, oh, that's that's simple. That's 5 hide. And if I draw 2 cards, chances are I will end up with a maximum of 5. If I draw the stock road and then maybe 1 more cheap location, it's going to be 2 plus 3. That's fine. No, because at the end you have your 2 locations plus 5 threat from one from each ally. So allies only really help you if they have willpower of 2 or more, and there aren't that many of those, and especially not so many that you can afford easily, because they are quite expensive. Like Elfhelm, I think, has 2 will, and he's 3. Faramir has 2. He's 4. Haldir, I believe, has 2. He's 4. Gildor and Glorion may even and you can't put Gildor into this deck, by the way, at the moment for the first adventure, because he's also an objective ally that pops out of nowhere if you're lucky. Which may be a good time to actually introduce Gildor, because meeting Gildor seems like a chance encounter, although of course Gildor, being an elf and being all mysterious and stuff, says, well, maybe this wasn't such a chance encounter, maybe this was preordained. And in order to make it possible for people to experience this feeling of they suddenly come across Gildor, and by suddenly I mean he's not in your deck as an ally, so you can't really foresee when he's coming by using maybe Vilya, Imladra Stargazer, and bring him in when you want, or things like that. He just pops up. And I don't know how often I've played the first scenario, but I've never really drawn him. I think he joined me once on my very first outing, and that one I lost. So he pops up. He has 3 will, which is really good for hide check. So even for questing, he has 3 hit points, 3 shields, 2 attack. But at the end of the round, if you don't want to discard him, you have to spend 1 ring resource. And sometimes you won't have those because you've been forced to exhaust the 1 ring in order not to increase your threat by 3, which you don't want, or because you want to cancel a card, and then if you're out of resources, he will, leave you. So I like the idea of having him in there, and of him being a fleeting ally. He will go away again if you don't pay him. Well, I mean, that's not thematic because it's not about paying him, but he will not stay, because in the book he also doesn't stay. When the guys wake up in the morning, the elves have left. So I think this is really nice, but that you can keep him if you have a ring resource. But mechanically speaking, I like his addition as an objective ally. He would also increase the threat level of a hide check because he is an ally, which is why they call him an objective ally, not just an objective. But with 3 willpower, he more than sets off this problem that you get for him being an ally. Like I said, towards the end of their journey, they get to the Marish, which is a huge marshland expanse at the eastern border. And of course, marshlands are not woody, hence there are marshes. And they've also put this in there by saying that after a player fails a hide test in the Marish, which can be overlooked from the stock road and from other roads as well, you can really look down into it from above. You have to get a Nazgul from the discard pile and shuffle it into the encounter deck. So it's almost like, oh, they've honed in on you. They saw you traipsing through the Marish, and now they're turning around again and they're coming towards you. So I really like that mechanic as well. So if you fail a high test there, you know, you're really screwed. Because it can lead to a lot of build up, and also with 4 exploration points, it's going to take you a while to explore this location. And last but not least, the second to last location that we visit with our friends is, of course, Bam Furlong, which is Farmer Maggot's place. And that's quite an interesting one in that it gives you a benefit, because after players travel to Bam Furlong, each player engaged with a Nazgul enemy may ready a hero he controls. And that's, of course, always good because you've got an enemy engaged with you, but you've probably also tried to quest as quickly as possible and as fast as possible. So it's always nice that when you get to Bam Furlong, you can ready a hero so that you can either defend or fight one of your engaged enemies. And I guess the idea behind it, and that's also very thematic, is Farmer Maggot is quite a stout hobbit, and he's huge for a hobbit, and he has 3 dogs, and he's got several sons and daughters, and he's got people working, he's got farm hands, so it's almost like they're gonna prop you up, they're gonna ensure that you can you know, fight another day. So I really like how they use this kind of background from the story and put it into this card. But of course, even the lovely feast at Farmer Maggot's is only a short respite, because people have to keep moving because they need to get to Buckleberry Ferry to get to Crick Hollow. And that is indeed the last card that I want to show you. And it's simply called Buckleberry Ferry. And I have to say, I really like the image because as they travel to Buckleberry Ferry on the horse and cart, there is a lot of fog, and it's very hard to see. Of course, it's immune to player card effects, because it would be really boring if you could just asphalt your way through it. It's also a place that you can't travel to unless you've gotten rid of all other locations in play. So you can't use your West Road Traveler, which will essentially allow you to switch out a location. Of course, it's immune to player card effects as well. And if there is any other location in the staging area, you cannot travel to this one. And note, it's not immune to card effects, it's just immune to player card effects. So if you have managed to travel to it, and in order to do this, you have to pass a Hide 3 test. That would be in stage 3A. At this stage, allies are no longer a detriment to you. So the fact that you have many allies would not add to the difficulty of the test. But there is a card called Stockbrook. And Stockbrook is, and I'm going to show you this card as well, is actually going to, I'm pretty sure, lead to a lot of curses, because what Stockbrook actually says is when you get Stockbrook from the encounter deck, so when you reveal it, you have to immediately travel to Stockbrook. If another location is currently active, return it to the staging area. So if, imagine, you know, my exasperation when I managed to travel to Buckleberry Ferry, I passed the height check. I was so happy. I managed to travel there, and on my next round, I, you know, set everyone on questing because I need to get the 9 exploration tokens, plus of course everything else you might need for stage 3B. And then out comes Stockbrook. I have to switch out those locations, and Stockbrook has another 5 to explore. Yeah, it does drive you crazy, which is also why it's very important to try and get rid of these locations as they come up and put them in the victory display so that they don't come to haunt you later on. But once you have managed to cross Buckleberry Ferry and you have put your 9 exploration tokens on it, you pass, you win the game. And I can tell you, it is very thematic. I really enjoyed it. I really like the mechanic of the hide tests. You know, you really want to keep away from those black riders. And there is actually no reason why you would want to confront them if you manage to keep your threat low. I believe you there. I don't think that any of the cards say you cannot finish unless all of the Nazgul, or unless there is a Nazgul in play. So I think it's one of the ones where you can say even if the Nazgul are in the staging area, if you manage to crush Buckleberry Ferry, you can still win. And that is of course very thematic, because there is no scene in the Lord of the Rings, in the book or in the film at this stage, not until Weathertop, where there's a confrontation where someone actually lifts a sword and tries to hit back at the Black Riders. So even just sitting there and, you know, like with your power deck and, I don't know, your Gandalf and your Galadriel, or maybe your Gandalf, your Elrond, Glorfindel hero deck, you know, just killing them left, right, and center. And I'm guilty of that too. I mean, with my deck, Hama, Glorfindel, and Elrond, I didn't care about those guys attacking me. I'm like, yeah, well, I'll scoff at you. But of course, I didn't play thematically by not having only Hobbit heroes. But if you only have Hobbit heroes, and they are hardy hobbits, but still they're hobbits, the idea is keep your threat low and run like crazy, hide, and bring out your allies towards the end. So that's just some strategic advice. But I really like how they put this into the game. And for those of you who are wondering, okay, I like LCGs. I could imagine I would like a Tolkien themed game because I love Tolkien. But I've heard so much about how the Lord of the Rings LCG is not really letting me replay the story. And even in the Saga expansions, how well is the story represented? I can tell you, at least for the Black Riders box, it is very well represented. I'm going to talk about the other 2 adventures, A Knife in the Dark, and also Fly to the Ford at a later stage, but definitely this week. I'm going to try and do one every evening now, or maybe not tomorrow, but Friday definitely. And until then, I wish you a very pleasant evening. If you are playing the Lord of the Rings LCG, I'm also curious to hear from people what kind of decks they use, because deck building is really my passion. I really enjoy it. And I wish you all a pleasant evening and keep gaming. Bye bye.